All right, we are live. Welcome back to Office Hours with Professor Ware. I'm apologizing in advance because I'm going to be struggling with my vocal cords throughout today's show. I've been doing a lot of media appearances lately. So I'm going to let my guests do a lot of the talking. I'm delighted to be joined today by Leslie Smith, former professional MMA fighter who was in the UFC for 4 years. Brilliant fighter, and I won't do the full CV, but for our purposes of a conversation today, the thing that was most striking to me is that she was released from the UFC shortly after a union organizing drive, because we're going to have a conversation today about combat sports reform. I'm the only candidate for major office in the United States that has a combat sports reform platform because I want fighters treated with dignity. I want fighters to be able to organize. I want fighters to be treated like human beings, not commodities. And I want us to end the era of combat sports being run like modern day Mandingo boxing. So I'm delighted to welcome Leslie into the space. I'm also delighted to welcome Lucas Middlebrooks into the space as well. And I just lost my intro on Lucas. So Lucas, please give your own intro if you don't mind.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm an attorney and I'm a labor attorney, and I represent labor on the labor side of labor law. Over the years, I do a lot of work both in the airline industry and other industrialized industries, but in the sports world, I represent the National Basketball Referees Association, or the NBRA. That is the union that represents the referees in the NBA, the G League, and the WNBA. I also represent the Major League Soccer Officials Union, which is the Professional Soccer Referees Association, and they represent the officials in both Major League Soccer, the National Women's Soccer League, and some other minor leagues of Major League Soccer. I've represented numerous MMA fighters, Nick Diaz, Leslie Smith, and I've been involved in multiple union organizing drives aimed at organizing the fighters in the UFC over the years.
Outstanding. And thank you for completing that introduction when the tech failed me. I did, when you started talking, remember that the highlight, at least for me, from your bio, was you representing Nick Diaz, because my wife, Clementina Aragon, she's from Stockton, California. And of course, Nick is the pride of Stockton, CA. And so, I'm sure, Stockton is watching, right now. And so shout out to my home away from home. So the way that I've structured these conversations in the past, and again, I'm going to probably back out of this conversation a little more to save my vocal cords and give you guys plenty of space. But the way that we've had these conversations before is that we're really talking about collective liberation. And of course, labor organizing is a critical part of that. And oftentimes, fighters and athletes, especially fighters, actually are left out of our understanding of what labor organizing looks like. So we've been having these broader conversations about collective liberation, and I framed them around the past, present, and future of the struggle that the guests are engaged in. So I want to organize this conversation around where we are in this present moment, then go back to the past, either for elements of our own biographies that might help inform the way that we're looking at this current moment, or historical precedent that helps us understand the moment that we're in, that orients us towards action. And then lastly, the action piece, the future. What are the steps from here to get fighters, treated with dignity rather than like Roman gladiators? I think that we'll do this just in the order of the introduction. Leslie, would you mind just taking a couple of minutes to kind of tell us where you see us situated in this present moment?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Right now, fighters don't have protections. They don't have a seat at the table. They don't get to discuss their future. They're not part of those conversations that are essential for workers, for labor to have. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like I don't see how that's going to change anytime soon, because there is not a union, there's not an association, and there was a lawsuit. There was a class action lawsuit, and I believe that there is an element of that is still going. Part of it was settled, and I think that there is something that they are still working on. Lucas might know more about that. Do you know if that class action is still going right now?
Sure. So there were two notable class actions, both based in the District of Nevada. federal district court. The first class action was the Lay versus Zuffa, and that one settled just for monetary settlement. I believe the settlement was $375 million gross, roughly 251 million then got distributed to fighters that fought in the UFC over a specific period of time. There's a second class action, Leslie, and that's the one you're referring to that is still ongoing, which actually bears Cajun Johnson's name as one of the lead plaintiffs. And that one is still ongoing, being litigated. And to my understanding, they are still seeking potential injunctive relief moving forward in that one in order to try to change some of the coercive practices employed by the UFC.
Yeah. And I do have really high hopes for that one. I know that a lot of the intentions that the group that did those, were to break up the monopoly, the monopsony of the UFC, so there could be other buyers, there could be other opportunities for people to fight. But at the same time, I don't actually think that that is the very best way to accomplish it. I think that a union is going to be the very best way for fighters to get to have the labor rights that so many other industries and so many athletes have at this point. There was actually a conflict in the past. We did try to work with those lawsuits. That's something that the NBA does, is that they leverage the threat of a class action or an actual class action lawsuit, along with union activity, forming and unforming a union, and they're able to accomplish a lot like that. But we weren't able to get all the parts together in order to work it like that.
Yeah, I mean the wealth and power gap is different, right? When you talk about the folks that are trying to unionize from a combat sports standpoint, at least that's what it looks like to me from the outside. Is that you have a certain top tier of folks that are making decent money, and then you have a lot of people that are fighting with very, very limited access to resources. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely right. And one of the problems there is that those people who are well taken care of at the very top, they're feeling well taken care of, or like they shouldn't be biting the hand that's feeding them, and like they don't want to rock the boat because they like the position that they're in. And they're the only ones who can actually rock the boat. They're the only ones. I mean, I shouldn't say only ones. They're the most impactful ones. That's the labor issue, right? Is that if you get everybody on board, then the boat's going to rock, even if you don't get that one person at the very top. But gosh, it'd be so much easier if those people on top in their moments could just jump on.
And this is a consistent theme across these dialogues that I've been having, is that some people want comfort, not liberation. Some people want to be integrated at the top of oppressive systems rather than just to have equitable systems, right? And so oftentimes the people that have that great platform are not necessarily using it to the maximum of their ability. And of course, it can be unfair to put all of that on an individual. You're absolutely right that it takes collective action, more broadly. But we also got to be realistic that when some people speak, folks are going to listen, carefully because of the platform that they have. I didn't mean to interrupt. Please do. If there was other stuff that you wanted to kind of frame the current moment, I was then going to move to Lucas and ask for his thoughts.
Yeah, no, just to piggyback off what Leslie was saying, and of course I agree with her with respect to the unionization path, because albeit the antitrust lawsuits can go in the past and recover unpaid monies like the first lawsuit did, and potentially with injunctive relief change the coercive contracts moving forward. But then even if that is successful and fighters are more inclined to pursue free agency with multiple entities, right? At least in my mind, some of the things that are still left on the table are comprehensive health care for fighters. That would be commonplace in a collective bargaining agreement. Would also be some type of fixed salary potentially for fighters as well. What a lot of people don't realize, Dr. Ware, is that some of the entry-level fighters in the UFC are making $14,000 to show and then only another 14,000 if they win. And these are all 1099 before independent contractor taxes, right? So that their payroll taxes are coming out of their purse. And I remember speaking to Leslie years ago about this, that there are fighters who actually lose money to,
Yeah.
to fight in the UFC, right?
I mean, sorry to interrupt, but I mean, I was just doing the math, and I was just thinking, when you combine that first point about not having comprehensive health coverage, let things go bad in that fight, and not only are you not, making any money, but you're losing money just, dealing with medical bills. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I'm running on universal single payer healthcare in the state of California, because, you know, first of all, like, that shouldn't be a thing. Every other wealthy country in the world has universal single payer healthcare, or a version of it, universal access at least. And so we really shouldn't, fighters shouldn't have to depend, on, those labor negotiations. I've argued many times that in the state of California, when we get that universal single payer healthcare, then actually unions will be able to negotiate predominantly for better wages and working conditions, which is what unions are supposed to be doing. Healthcare really should be taken care of from the beginning. So I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to create an environment that empowers, athletes and fighters, but ordinary working folks too. Please do continue, kind of setting your overview of where we are now.
Right, and other other common collectively bargained items, such as retirement packages,
Yep.
which currently don't exist for fighters in the UFC. And the thing that jumped out at me back in 2015 when I was representing Nick was drug testing is a mandatory subject of bargaining under the National Labor Relations Act, just like wages and benefits. And this is highly negotiated in all professional sports,
Yep.
obviously, because someone's career is on the line with respect to these drug testing protocol, and there are none currently protecting UFC fighters. There's a litany of issues that we could talk about forever with respect to what the fighters don't currently get. But I think presently where we are, Dr. Ware, is an interesting situation because there was two notable union movements in 2016 with the Professional Fighters Association, and then shortly after that with Leslie's organizing movement, Project Spearhead, which were both picking up steam amongst the fighters. And unfortunately, it really slowed down when Leslie was released. And since that time, there really has not been an active organizing drive. Now, unfortunately, under the current administration, which controls the National Labor Relations Board, you will have to, any organizing drive in the UFC will have to answer the question between independent contractor and employee status. Now, when you had the Biden-controlled NLRB, there was no doubt in my mind, under the general counsel at the time, Jennifer Abruzzo, that they would have found that these fighters were employees despite being mislabeled as independent contractors. In fact, Leslie filed her retaliation complaint against the UFC after being released. That went to Region 4 of the NLRB in Philadelphia. Region 4 was prepared to make a merit determination in Leslie's favor on two important issues. One was that the UFC fighters were employees misclassified as independent contractors.
That's huge.
Would have been huge.
Huge.
And
Yeah,
two, that Leslie was retaliated against for her organizing activities.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the Trump administration is, particularly hostile. I will also say that the Democrat administrations have been good at making noise about being supporting of labor organizing, but actually not necessarily delivering. And especially here in the state of California, the way that the Democrat establishment is in bed with labor leadership against the rank and file. Yeah. So, but I don't want to, to digress too far down that road. I want to just bring in a couple pieces together now. The first is Project Spearhead is a super dope name. So did you come up with Leslie? Was that you? And can you tell me more about Project Spearhead that Lucas just name dropped?
Yeah. Well, I was pretty excited about the name. It was a union organizing drive, but people were pretty scared of the word union. A lot of the people that I talked to, they didn't like the word union. They didn't completely understand what it meant and how it would work for them or help them. there's been a really successful campaign against unions here in the United States.
Yep.
And a lot of people have absorbed a lot of that. And so we definitely didn't want to call it a union at that time. And it couldn't be me, it wasn't about me. And so Project Spearhead, the idea was just that it was going to start the whole thing off. And I still
Yeah.
like.
It's an amazing title. I mean, the propagandizing of the American populace with respect to union organizing is, one of the greatest psyops and mind control operations ever, executed in human history. If it's not for union organizing, we don't get a 40-day work week. We don't get a 40-hour work week, a 5-day work week. We don't get any child protections. And the ownership class, that capitalist class, has been just drilling on people, to get them to abandon the most powerful tool that we have in a capitalist system, which is to be able to withdraw our labor. And that's actually, to go back to the point I was making with Lucas, because Biden gets no shine on my show. I'm just going to be clear about that. Is that, well, and the reason is that they play in public like they're there for labor, but then he also kneecapped, federal employees' right to strike, kneecapped, right to strike in other domains as well. And I think that that's one of the kind of critical pieces, is that withdrawing our labor from these systems is the most powerful weapon we have. I mean, that's returns kind of to Leslie's initial point, right? Which is that lawsuits are great. And I'll tell you, my lawyer in my case now against the Democrats who are trying to knock me off the ballot in the state of California is being brought by a lawyer called Tawfiq Morar. And Tawfiq reminds people that legislation is not the principal way that law is made. Law is made in this country principally by legal precedent. So I'm not in any way underselling the importance of suing their asses when they act crazy. Like, definitely sue their asses when they act crazy, and withdrawing our labor and being able to utilize organized labor in order to really strike at the heart of that ownership class. I think that is the most powerful tool. But the two of them together, right? That's what you guys are here to represent. That's what this conversation is about. And that brings us to the next part, is that what kinds of lessons or inspiration have you guys taken from either from the past, right? So present, now past, either from your own journey or from kind of historical, moments in, combat sports history or union organizing history, or just in your own path. And I think that just to keep things moving, I'll ask Lucas the first time to respond to this one, and then pass it to Leslie.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I would draw on my experiences just in the labor world, in organizing in general, and then briefly with respect to Leslie and Project Spearhead. Is that labor organizing, while a lot of it is done obviously online now through social media, right? You still can't replace what I would call the boots on the ground. And Leslie and I often had these discussions when she was pushing forward with Project Spearhead, right, which was, operating on either a non-existent budget or a shoestring budget. But we would always discuss how, if you were really going to make strides in this organizing effort, that you would need boots on the ground. And what I mean by that is you would need representatives going to the gyms, because fighters are not like a normal industrialized workforce where you can go to the factory floor and collect authorization cards, and you could get hundreds at a time, right? They're dispersed across the United States, they're dispersed across the world, and so to the extent that you have to get out there and educate the fighters with respect to the benefits of unionization, because there's a lot of misnomers and falsehoods that are out there in people's mind. And what Leslie and I found was, the more you talk to people and just have conversations at a real human level, they start to understand the benefit. And Dr. Ware, what you mentioned earlier, they start to understand the value of their labor in a collective setting, and the power that they may hold in withholding that labor, if necessary. And so, whereas Leslie was making significant strides and she was really doing most of the organizing on her own and online, It was really never tested from a standpoint of if you had financial backing and you were able to put people out there talking, right? I think it could snowball even faster if the climate was right for it.
Yeah. Leslie, any thoughts either on your specific past in this or the deeper history? And don't feel pressed to go in on the deeper history because I got a lot to say about the deeper history. I'll just throw that in.
Well, I'm excited to hear what you have to say about the deeper history. I think that what was so interesting to me is that I really learned that I have a different perspective than a lot of people because I didn't, maybe I didn't go about it in the smartest way about having these private conversations and gyms and building. I mean, I definitely didn't go about it the smartest way. I think that it would have been a lot more effective if somebody were to, like Mr. Middlebrook is saying, go from gym to gym and have these private conversations behind closed doors and then build up this solidarity and this feeling of community, and that confidence would turn into a collective confidence, which would in turn help all the individual peoples with their confidence, and that would develop it. I think that is definitely the way to go. But I thought that everybody knew that collective action is the thing that I just, that was a given to me. I mean, I'm a fan of David and Goliath stories, and like I guess I've always liked the underdog perspective. I didn't realize it until I started talking to other people, and I found out that they didn't see it the same way, and they didn't understand or perceive it the same way. And so I thought that just saying, "Hey, this is an option," would get everybody on board. And so I did a bunch of Twitter talking. And posting and on Instagram and talking to people through social media. And I don't think that that is the way somebody in the future should do it. I think that it should be exactly what Lucas was talking about, with people getting together and forming those relationships in the community.
From the ground up.
Yeah,
up. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. No, I wasn't interrupting. I was hearing it now, like, and fully understand it. So please do continue. But yeah, it's different when it comes from the top down, and it's kind of just vocal messaging that comes in a public space, as opposed to bubbling up in interpersonal interactions with trusted comrades. Yeah. I mean, I will just say to add a piece to this. That's what Jesse Ventura was doing when he was first trying to unionize professional wrestlers, and this is a really important precedent for me because Jesse was the last independent, not Democrat or Republican candidate to win a major gubernatorial election. I was there in Minnesota in 1998. I grew up on the south side of Minneapolis. And so, so watching how Jesse did things politically, as a gubernatorial candidate is something that's significant to me, and how he governed actually after he got power by, utilizing the enmity that Team Blue and Red have for each other to get his own agenda passed, right? I'm taking notes because I'm going to need all of that game. But one of the things that he did when he was trying to organize the professional wrestlers was exactly those locker room conversations. And he started by, just talking to the guys in the locker room about this and building this. And no joke with this, it came out when Hulk Hogan passed away recently that Hulk Hogan ratted him out to management. Like literally, scabbing before there was even a union, snitched to management. And Jesse Ventura hated Hulk Hogan, because of that. I hated Hulk Hogan because he used the N-word all the time. And it was sad because as a kid, I loved Hulk Hogan, yeah, brother, I loved all of that stuff. It was fantastic. It was a great time for me, but it was a shame to learn that this guy was a union buster as well as, being either low key or high key racist. So that's, I think, one kind of piece is that folks have tried to get these spaces organized, but they have met with a lot of these obstacles that you guys have faced. And when we move into the next part of the conversation, I want to think about how we can collectively work to overcome those. But I want to get one other kind of historical precedent into the conversation just for my own sake. I converted to Islam when I was 15 years old. When I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, I have like multiple pictures of Malcolm in my office at all times. You know, like that was my introduction into kind of the Black Muslim radical tradition. And of course, the other great famous Black Muslim figure of the 1960s and 1970s was Muhammad Ali. You know, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, hand can't hit, which your eye can't see, rumble, young man, rumble. And Ali was not just famous for what he did in the ring, but he was much more famous for what he did outside of the ring, the stands that he was willing to take, the sacrifices that he was willing to make, losing prime years of his career because he would not participate in an imperialist war to colonize the people of Vietnam after they had managed to get free from French colonization. So I think that one of the things that I hope can emerge out of this conversation is that we can call on people like, for example, a donor to the Stein Ware campaign to when I ran as vice president with Jill Stein back in 2024 was the great Palestinian fighter Bilal Muhammad, right? Bully Boy 170 on Instagram. He supported our campaign because we stand for Palestinian liberation. I ain't reading all of that, free Palestine, right? That's what the kids at the encampment at Columbia University said. But I think getting a figure like Bilal Muhammad to speak out, on union organizing, his manager's a good friend, Lewis Taylor, also a former champion, I know supports this cause. So one of the things I just like to say is I want to put whatever resources, human, political, social media that I can into this effort, because I really think it's of critical importance that we empower organized labor across all spaces, with the exception of the police. Police unions aren't real unions, and that's a separate conversation. Is there any other stuff that we feel like we should cover with respect to the past, either organizing history, past history, or your guys' own kind of working us towards this point where we find ourselves now?
There is one thing that I want to talk
Please.
about, and that is that as the sport is evolving and growing bigger, that the people who are involved in it are also evolving and developing and getting more professional. And at the beginning of the sport, I mean, it hasn't been around for years. It's not as old as football or
Right.
baseball or anything like that. And at first, it had a really poor reputation of just, I mean, people fighting. You can look at it however you want to, but people used to look at it really poorly, and people see it a lot better now. There's a lot more positivity around it now. It has more people that train MMA, that train combat sports, and are fans of combat sports than ever before. There's a higher level of professionalism in the athletes and the fans and the entire industry than ever before.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it is moving in a good direction because of that, and that there's more opportunities available than there ever have been before.
I think that that's an amazing point, and I'm glad you brought us back for it before we move on to the future of things. I mean, my wife, who I mentioned before, is from Stockton. She does mixed martial arts training. That's like her preferred, kind of cardio and training activity. I mean, I met her at the gym, 5'2" Mexican squatting 285 by 6, 225-pound Mexican squatting 285 by 6. And I was like, okay, this chick's strong. Just for the record, I boxed, so I was never an MMA guy. Boys club as a kid, boxing. I played minor league baseball. I played high school basketball and football. I played college baseball as well. Now the way that I get my kind of athletic stuff out is with lifting. So last year at age 51, I hit a 225 by 30 bench press set. Like NFL combine numbers. And yeah,
Seriously?
I'm 52 now, because even light skinned black don't crack. When you moisturize, we're holding it together. We're keeping, keeping things tight. But I think that you're right. I think that there's been a big shift and that's all I meant by referencing, Clem's MMA and UFC, MMA training, is that this has become, mainstream with respect to sport. It now holds the place in the public imagination that boxing held in Ali's time. And I think that there really is a great opportunity for the space to become one where athletes can become social movement leaders and icons in that way and lead us to, you know, a more just society, rather than only winning fights. And don't get me wrong, winning fights is great, but winning fights in a society is even more important than winning fights in the ring. One last thing, I guess, on the past before we get to the future, and I heard it after the fact. So isn't Dana White trying to appropriate Muhammad Ali's legacy with his so-called Ali Revival Act? And doesn't that just want to make you vomit? And what can you tell me about Dana White?
Lucas is more versed in this. I just want to say, yes, it is frustrating. It's disappointing that they're taking those words, but we were just discussing this actually, and yeah, I'd love to hear what else Lucas has to say about it.
Yeah, it's concerning to me, the Revival Act, I believe, as it's being called, which I believe passed the House just by a voice vote recently, and it'll move on to the Senate. What is concerning to me about the changes to the legislation, Dr. Ware, are the provisions or the exceptions for the Unified Boxing Organizations, as they call them, or the UBOs, where you would actually, I believe, be allowed to lock fighters up for a period of 6 years as a UBO, and a UBO would also be allowed to essentially be its own sanctioning body. And so, if all of this sounds acutely familiar, it's because it is. It is essentially the UFC model being pushed into boxing, and I think anyone that follows, the fight game. Knows that the top end boxers make substantially more money than the top end MMA fighters, and a lot of that is due to the fact that you can't lock these fighters into coercive contracts under the current version of the Ali Act. But if we are going to draw out exceptions for TKO, who I understand has been lobbying quite heavily in Washington D.C. for these exceptions, then you are essentially going to facilitate Dana White using the same model for boxing, which has suppressed wages in MMA. And the big kicker in all of this is that even in the Revival Act, there is no extension of those provisions to MMA. And so essentially, Dana White would be having his cake and eating it too.
Wow. I'm so glad we came back for that, because my team pointed out to me that TKO holding group is just this $1 billion conglomerate, and it drew me back to, like, the reason why I got into electoral politics at all in the first place, which is who funds you runs you, right? So these special interests, these billionaires and corporations have Democrat and Republican lawmakers on the payroll, and they do whatever they can to get across these, these special provisions that they've already, worked out will be to the benefit of their bottom line and to the detriment of the working class, right? The laborers, because people forget, they only know these famous, fighters. They forget about the guy who's making, or the gal who's making 14, K to show up in the ring and doesn't have any, health insurance, and is literally like fighting for their life, sometimes with no other, kind of like means of it. Like my father had a 6th grade education. He was able to pay the bills, as a locksmith and as a musician. But like a lot of the fighters are coming from the humblest of backgrounds, the most meager of backgrounds, and then find themselves in these multi-billion-dollar industries where they're getting work like modern day slaves. I meant what I said about the Mandingo boxing thing at the outset. You're out there putting your body on the line, and somebody else is cashing all of the checks off of it. That shit's got to stop. And we have to get organized if we're going to fight. Malcolm, again, my hero and role model, Malcolm said, we're not outnumbered, we're just out organized. So we have to get organized to be able to fight back against these folks. And one of the ways that we can do that is actually put people into office who don't take money from PACs, don't take money from corporations, don't take money from billionaires. Present, right? I'm like 7 Up back in the day. Never had it, never will. Right? You can't miss what you've never had. And the Green Party, that's what we represent. No, there's no corruption because we will not take a penny of those special interest fund or those corporate funds. So just know, as we get into this next part of this conversation, that I'm going to do everything that I can to fight alongside you guys in this. And I guess that takes us to the next part of the convo, which is, what are the steps forward from here to getting something that looks more like justice in this domain? And I guess I'll leave it open because I picked one first, but Leslie, you were about to go. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Well, unfortunately, I don't have anything really novel to add to it. It's just that I've always thought that education is going to be the way to get people on board, that people just need to know what the differences are. Unfortunately, there's campaigns going in the opposite direction. There is I don't really like the way that UFC has gotten, it's not that I don't like it being political, things can be political, but there's some psychology behind what's going on that I don't completely understand. And that has a lot to do, it's led to the UFC fight in the White House, that President Trump has taken this interest in MMA and fighters, and he's got this friendship with Dana White. And so there's all these fighters who, I don't know if they see themselves as stronger because they're aligned with the president, and they're not really looking deeper. I don't know what it is, but there is this association between a very strong anti-labor force in the president and fighters. And so it's very easy to see those lines being drawn. Like, well, if you're a strong fighter, if you're typical and regular, like all these other strong, amazing fighters, then you're probably pro-Trump. And if you're pro-Trump, then you're anti-labor and anti-union and organizing. And so there's got to be a way to make it really clear that those are not actual lines, that isn't the way that it is, that in fact, a really strong person is probably not going to be pro-Trump, and that it doesn't have to be like that.
It's such an incredibly powerful point. I would hazard the guess that this has been predominantly male fighters, correct, that have been taken in by this rhetoric, or not necessarily.
That
predominantly, but not exclusively. Well, the reason
that's fair,
the reason why I mention it is that I think that there's a little bit of an overlap. Well, okay, so first of all, I have posted that this is the only campaign that is trying to take the fitness space back from the fitness to fascist pipeline. That there is a kind of alt-right leaning in a lot of the athletic space that takes place in social media. And so when you take somebody like Jake Paul, for example, and his proximity to Trump, I think that this is a typical case of that. Somebody like Andrew Tate, these are manosphere douchebag bros, right? So that is part of their alignment there. But I think that there's a broader, question which you've raised, which is why are working class people identifying with those that attack them, right, against their own interests? And I think that this is a conversation, like you said at the outset, that there's some kind of psychological operation taking place. I'm gonna, at the risk of going, slightly long, I just want to tell a story that a mentor told me that I feel like helps, explain it. So I was like 19. We were coming out. There's a professor, and he said, "Butch, do you know how they train elephants at the circus?" And I was caught flat-footed. I had no idea what he's talking about. Looking at him the way that you're looking at me right now, and I'm like, "No, I'm sure I don't." Basically, and why do you ask? He said, "Well, they whip them real hard. They whip them hard with heavy lashes every time they try to run, because." Even a baby bull elephant, if it gets loose, it can trample a half dozen people to death in a matter of seconds. And they take heavy chains and they affix those chains to the leg of the animal. till the iron bites into the flesh, to the skin of that animal. And they affix those heavy chains to heavy pegs that are anchored in concrete. So that every time that animal tries to run, it finds that it's futile. So it runs and can't move, and it's whipped and it's punished for every time it tries to get itself free. He said, but once that animal has been broken, it can grow to weigh a couple of tons, and you can keep it in place by waving any insignificant string in the air. You can take any insignificant string, tie it around the ankle of that animal, tether that to any insignificant peg, and it will never run.
Mm-hmm.
And then he asked me, do you know why I'm telling you this story? So I ask you the question that he asked me, like, do you kind of see where I'm going with this? When you've taught people to internalize the systems that oppress them, then they will voluntarily keep themselves in place.
Mm-hmm.
They identify with the system that is brutalizing them. And then the system doesn't have to do that work of control. The control is in here. The control is in here. That's what I got when I read Malcolm's autobiography. I found somebody who, despite the fact that the system had broken him down, he got free here and here, and therefore couldn't be contained anymore, couldn't be stopped. And I think that when you referred to it as a psyop earlier, like, this is where a shift in perspective is needed. Education is needed. People with platform really need to draw attention to that fundamental contradiction. And I said this in a speech to the SEIU Local 1000, which they just endorsed Eric Swalwell, who is an anti-labor guy, right? Mm-hmm. And also a Zionist, separate question. But I just want to be clear, we had people in the room after that debate at the SEIU Local 1000. I beat the next two candidates combined for best candidate, but SEIU Local's leadership nonetheless went with the traditional, Democrat establishment. And why am I mentioning it? Because in that debate, I said just a simple fact: you cannot represent management and the shop floor at the same time. Mm-hmm. And that's what the union leadership, unfortunately, in a lot of these unions that is in bed with the Democrats, have done. You either represent the ruling class or you represent the working class. You can't serve both masters at the same time. And I think that, to your point, Leslie, folks that are the working class, that are part of the labor in this, need to embrace their power and understand that while they might aspire to some of the accoutrements of power that somebody like Trump, or for that matter, somebody like Obama, who was no friend of labor, organized labor either, just to be blunt about it, that while they might aspire to some of those accoutrements of power, the real power is in the people. The real power is in workers organizing. The real power is in organized labor.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? The elephant story resonates, and it resonates, and Leslie, you'll appreciate this, is that, when Leslie was organizing through Project Spearhead, we saw a very real climate of fear amongst the fighters. And so one of Leslie's main focuses was that, everything was going to be anonymous, right? So if a fighter wanted to sign an authorization card, that's protected by federal law under the anonymity, but that Leslie would never tell one person or another. In fact, she took it so seriously that the authorization cards would come directly to me as counsel to Project Spearhead, so that even Leslie wouldn't know who signed a card and who did not. But you mentioned that fear taking hold to where it ends up controlling the entire group, and we were seeing these strides away from that while Leslie was organizing, and if you haven't seen it, you could go up on X or Google or wherever, and there was a key moment in 2017. The UFC organized a fighter retreat, and they invited all the fighters in. They had these speakers, and the keynote speaker was Kobe Bryant. And he was on a stage, and they had a panel, and they were asking questions. And then at one point, they opened it up to questions from the fighters who were there from the retreat. And true to form, Leslie stood up and she asked Kobe Bryant, can you explain to this group how important the PA, the NBA PA, was to your career as an athlete? And I tell you, if you watch that clip, Kobe did not hesitate. and he said something along the lines of, I can't tell you how important it was to my career. He said, because while we may have been at each other's throats competing on the court, when we got in our union meetings, we all realized that a rising tide lifts all boats. And Leslie said, well, we're thinking about unionizing here. And she gets a thunderous applause. So just from that clip alone, you can see that the appetite is there.
Yeah.
That the appetite is there amongst the fighters. But the question is the appetite hungrier than the fear? And that's where the education component comes in. And I'll just share one more story, is that during this time period, I was traveling for unrelated work, and I was in Denver. And I was eating at the restaurant bar with the president of the union I was representing at the time. And a very notable fighter comes in and sits down to also eat at the bar, just happenstance. And we get talking, and we shift to the discussion of unionization. And this particular fighter was very anti-union. But a lot of the negative thought process around the union was just really lack of understanding of what it meant to be unionized. And it was so fascinating to me, was after a 30-minute conversation at that restaurant bar, we ended up exchanging phone numbers, and the thought process was shifting. You could see the thought process shifting. So to Leslie's point, that the education component is key to people understanding, like you mentioned earlier, how important their collective power really is.
Beautiful. You just helped me understand by explaining that story took place in 2017, why they were driving Leslie out, because the power, they felt the power, right? The people need to be taught the power that they have, and need to be reminded of it, because we are conditioned into like a learned helplessness. And it's actually through building those organizational networks that we find the power that we actually have. Before I give you guys each a chance for any kind of closing thoughts or reflections on the way forward, I just wanted to kind of publicly make some commitments. So I'm doing an event, we're calling it Unity Uprising, Black Radical Tradition and Collective Liberation. So this isn't just about Black liberation, it's about the relationship between Black freedom struggle and all collective liberation struggle. And one of the guests that is coming in for this, so this is April 4th, at Cal State LA. I'm co-hosting it with Dr. Melina Abdullah, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. And one of the guests is, one of our guests is Chris Smalls, the Amazon labor organizer who got Amazon organized. So I want to publicly commit to connecting you guys with Chris about how we can think about how to reinvigorate the efforts to organize that space. Because one thing that's different about me, I'm not a career politician. I'm somebody that's been in activist and organizing in community education space as well as academic space, for decades. Winning elections is great, and I'm running them to win. And I do think it would make a massive difference to have support from the executive branch, for example, in a lot of these efforts. But I don't believe elections do it by itself. I believe in what the Panthers believed in, which is mutual aid plus direct action plus electoral power. And so the mutual aid is like building community strength, but the direct action is organizing and especially leveraging union organization and strikes and work stoppages in order to actually create the collective change that we need. Because I don't think that elected officials are capable of doing it by themselves, but I think that elected officials can clear ground so that community and organized labor and others can do the work that's needed to get to an equitable society where working people are treated with dignity. Mm-hmm. So I want to just make that command one. I want to put you guys in touch with Chris, because he's become a good friend through this process. And then I just want to pledge my support, whatever way I can help amplify or help organize or help connect potentially disparate networks so that we can get this work done. You have my pledge. And I think that the last thing I would just do, just with the time that we have left, is that if there are any other reflections or calls to action or anything else you wanted to tell folks before we finish this conversation.
Well, first, thank you for your promises. That's wonderful and amazing. and I am grateful for it. I am not an active fighter anymore, but I'm still part of the combat sports world. I coach jujitsu, and I have a lot of friends who are still fighting, and I do still want to be part of the fight. I'm in law school right now. I just finished my first year of law school. Yeah, thank you. Not well, my first semester. I'm almost done with the first year. And so I just hope that I get to be a part of it. I feel like it can happen, and I want to be a part of it. And I see my role in the future as being more somebody who can educate and facilitate that the efforts that people are willing to make, and I'm going to do everything I can to be that person.
Outstanding.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that your interest in this. It's something that I have been kind of passionately engaged in since 2015, since I started represented Nick, and then I met Leslie shortly thereafter in the context of the union movement. I truly believe in my heart that if these fighters were able to ever find their collective voice and their strength, that it would change their industry, both for the current generation and future generations. And Dr. Ware, something you mentioned, about your upcoming discussion with Chris Smalls, who I followed from the outside looking in, and kudos, what an amazing job he did, becoming the first organizer of an Amazon property, which was no small feat. But I've always looked at unionism as transcending our differences, as transcending race or differences in religion. And what I mean by that is if you ever look at a picket line where you have to hold the line in order to push the needle at negotiations or in collective bargaining, is that you have all races, you have all genders, you have all religions, and they're all marching towards a singular cause. In fact, we all know, Dr. King was a big union supporter, obviously during the civil rights movement. And that's something that just from the outside looking in that I've always felt is so special about the union movement, is that our individual differences evaporate and everyone's charging up the same hill on the collective path. And having sat at a number of bargaining tables, both with and without the right to strike, and that's a whole different story. There's something acutely passionate about that collective strength and watching people put aside their differences to achieve the greater good. And it's my hope someday that fighters can rally around that flag, because it will change the industry and it will change their lives and their careers.
Well said. The Black Panthers were foundational in the creation of the Brown Berets, Chicano organization, Young Lords, Puerto Rican organization, Young Patriots, White Appalachian, organized group. If you go to my website, butchwareforgov.com, at the bottom of every page, it says solidarity beyond identity and ideology. The goal is not to get everybody to look the same or to think the same. You don't need that in order to move in unity. You just need to be willing to fight alongside and for someone who doesn't pray with who you pray with, or lay with who you lay with, or look how you look, and recognize that their humanity and dignity is every bit as sacred as yours, and that unless you're standing shoulder to shoulder to fight for their dignity, then the people who want to diminish all of our dignity will have their way with us. So that's the goal. It transcends bounds of ethnicity, it transcends bounds of race or culture or religion or sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. That's what I mean when I say it's collective liberation, because it's either collective liberation or it ain't no liberation at all.
Yes.
I'm a mic drop on that. Thanks for spending an hour with me, guys. I look forward to the follow-up. I'll have my team be in touch about those deliverables, and look forward to including you guys in some subsequent conversations. And Lucas may also reach out to you for some legal stuff.
Fair enough. Happy to help.
All right. Take care, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was an honor.